three stories, three different people, three moments when time stopped behaving the way it's supposed to. A family lands from a domestic flight, and their luggage has been waiting on the carousel for hours. A man drives a road he knows by heart and passes the same gas station 4 times in 4 minutes, while his clock counts the same 4 minutes twice. A woman finds a recording on her sleep app and hears a voice that couldn't have been in that room, telling her it's dead. None of them have explanations. Let's get into it. The bags were already there. That's the part that doesn't go away. Not the feeling on the plane. Feelings can be dismissed. Not the confusion when they landed. Confusion happens. The part that doesn't go away is the bags. They were practically the last ones on the carousel. The airline staff had already flagged them. "Are you the family that was on the Denver flight?" The attendant looked relieved to finally find them, and then looked confused when she saw that they seemed completely normal. That they weren't panicking, because they didn't know yet. They didn't know the luggage had been waiting for 2.5 hours. This story was posted on Reddit's RC Glitch in the Matrix in 2014 by a user who went by the name Throwaway Flight Gap. The account was deleted shortly after, which is common for people who don't want to be associated publicly with something they can't explain. But the post was archived, screenshot, and discussed extensively by the community. What makes it unusual isn't the experience itself, it's the evidence. The family, a husband, wife, and their teenage son, had taken a short domestic flight, under 2 hours in the air, a route they'd done before. Nothing remarkable about the flight. Boarding was normal. Takeoff was normal. The flight attendant came by with drinks. They watched separate things on their devices. The son fell asleep for part of it. They all agreed later. Nothing felt off. No turbulence. No announcement. No moment where the lights flickered or someone looked worried. The plane landed. They waited for the seatbelt sign to turn off, retrieved their carry-ons from the overhead, and walked off the jet bridge with everyone else. Normal. Completely normal. It wasn't until the baggage claim that the day stopped being normal. An airline employee approached them before they even reached the carousel. She was holding a clipboard. "Are you the Hendersons?" That's not their real name, but the post used a placeholder. They said yes. "Your luggage has been here for a while. We were starting to wonder. The husband thought maybe there was a miscommunication. Maybe their bags had been on an earlier flight somehow, routed separately. He asked how long. The employee checked her paperwork. 2 hours and 22 minutes. The husband said that wasn't possible. Their plane had just landed. He showed her the boarding pass on his phone, the timestamp showing when the door had closed at origin. He showed her the text notification he'd received from the airline when the flight landed. She looked at it. She looked at her paperwork. She said she'd get a supervisor. The supervisor came, and here's where it becomes difficult to explain away. The flight had, in fact, landed on schedule. The records showed that. The records also showed that the family's checked luggage had been unloaded from the cargo hold and placed on the baggage carousel, and that this had happened 2 hours and 22 minutes before the family appeared at the baggage claim. 2 hours and 22 minutes during which the family had been where exactly? According to their own accounts, they had been on the plane, walking off the plane, walking through the jet bridge, walking through the terminal. A walk that should take, at most, 15 minutes from gate to baggage claim. But there was no 15-minute gap in the timeline. There was a 2 hour and 22-minute gap. The son, who had been asleep for part of the flight, said he woke up normally when the plane landed. He remembered the landing. He remembered the overhead announcement. He had a text message from a friend sent at a specific time, a time that should have been during the walk from gate to baggage claim, that he'd replied to. His reply was logged. The timestamp on his reply matched the rest of the family's subjective experience of the timeline, but the bags disagreed. The supervisor had no explanation. She offered them a form to fill out for a flight irregularity. The husband asked, "Was there any record of the plane sitting on the tarmac for 2 hours before unloading?" No. The unloading logs showed the bags came off shortly after landing, consistent with normal procedure. Was there any record of a ground delay? No. The flight data was clean. Could the cargo timestamps be wrong? Possibly. But the employee who physically placed the bags on the carousel had logged the time manually, and her shift log showed she'd moved on to other tasks for 2 hours before this family finally appeared. The family left. They didn't file the irregularity form. What would they even write? When they got home, the husband posted to "R's glitch in the matrix." He wasn't looking for validation. He was looking for anyone who had experienced something similar, because the rational explanations were running out. What he found was a thread of over 400 comments. Dozens of people described similar experiences, not all with flights, some with drives, some with walks, some with periods of sleep. But the consistent thread was this: the objective timeline didn't match the subjective experience. And in this case, unlike most time-slip stories, there was physical evidence. Bags that arrived before their owners on the same plane. The most common explanation offered by the paranormal community is something called a temporal dissociation event. The idea being that consciousness, under certain conditions, can slip slightly out of sync with physical time. The body continues operating, walking, texting, breathing, while the subjective experience lags or loops. The most common explanation offered by skeptics is clerical error. The cargo log was wrong. The employee remembered wrong. Someone made a mistake. The husband's response to that theory in the thread was precise. "If it was just the log, I'd accept that. But my son has a text reply timestamped at a time when, according to the cargo records, we didn't exist at that airport yet. That's not a clerical error. That's two independent timelines that don't match." No one had a good answer to that. What do you do with a story like that? The family reportedly never spoke about it publicly again after the Reddit post. The account was deleted within a week. Not because anyone harassed them. The comments were mostly sympathetic, but because the husband wrote in a final edit before deleting, talking about it made it feel more real in a way that was uncomfortable. "We're just going to agree as a family that it happened and that we don't understand it and move on." That's a reasonable response. That's probably the sane response. But the bags were there, 2 hours and 22 minutes before them. And the question that stays with me, that I think stays with anyone who reads this account carefully, is not what happened to the family's time. It's what happened to the 140-something other passengers on that same plane. Were they affected too? Did they notice? Did any of them go home and try to account for those 2 hours and come up empty? Or was it only this family? And if it was only this family, why them? He knew the road. That's important to understand. This wasn't a new route. Wasn't a detour. Wasn't a road he'd taken once. He drove it 3 or 4 times a week. He knew every turn. He knew which gas station came before the railroad crossing, which billboard appeared on the left just before the overpass. He knew the road the way you know your own name. Which is why, when he passed the same gas station for the 3rd time, he understood that something was wrong. The post on RR Glitch in the Matrix was written by a user called Road Loop 7. Sometime in 2013, he described himself as someone with no particular interest in the paranormal. He found the subreddit while searching for explanations after the fact. It was a Tuesday night. He was driving home from a friend's house, a drive he'd done dozens of times. 40 minutes, maybe 45 with traffic. He left just after 11 p.m. The first time he passed the gas station, he didn't think anything of it. That's just where the gas station is. The second time, he slowed down slightly. That's strange. The third time, he stopped. He sat in the car for a moment. He looked at the clock. 3:17 a.m. He drove on. He passed the railroad crossing, the same railroad crossing, and then the overpass, then the gas station again. 3:21 a.m. Then the crossing, the overpass. 3:17 a.m. He wasn't making wrong turns. He checked. He was in the correct lane, following the road as it went. The road simply curved back around, or something that looked exactly like his road did, in the exact same sequence, with the exact same landmarks in the exact same positions, for approximately 4 minutes of clock time, which the clock itself seemed to be living twice. He drove a loop on a road that doesn't loop. He described the experience as dreamlike, but not like a dream. He was awake, alert, aware that something was wrong. He wasn't confused or disoriented in the way you are when you've drifted off. He was sharp, sharp enough to be scared, sharp enough to grip the wheel harder. I kept thinking, if I just keep going, the road will correct itself. So I kept going. Eventually, he couldn't say exactly when, couldn't identify a moment where the loop ended. He was just on the correct road again. The gas station wasn't in front of him anymore. The overpass was behind him. He was 8 minutes from home, on the right stretch of road, the clock reading something that made sense. He arrived home at what would have been a reasonable time for the route he'd taken, not 2 hours late, not confused in any way that his roommate would have noticed. He sat in the driveway for 20 minutes before going inside. When he posted about it, he wasn't looking for confirmation that it was supernatural. He asked specifically whether there was a neurological explanation, whether the brain could produce this experience in a person who was genuinely awake and alert. Several commenters suggested it sounded similar to dissociative episodes or petit mal seizures that affect spatial perception. He responded to all of them the same way. I considered that. But the clock, if it was neurological, if my brain was looping, why did the clock change too? That's the piece that doesn't fit the neurological explanation. His perception of landmarks repeating could be a brain event, but the clock is external. The clock doesn't have a brain. The clock showed 3:17, then 3:21, then 3:17, then 3:21. Not his perception of the clock, the actual numbers on the dashboard display. His post received over 600 replies. Many of them were from people who described similar experiences, not all on roads, not all at the same time of night, but all with the same structure. Objective time behaving as though it had gotten stuck. None of them had explanations either. She almost didn't listen to it. October 1st. That was the date on the recording. December the 30th was when she finally opened it, 3 months later, going through old files to clear space on her phone. She almost deleted it unheard. She almost pressed delete and moved on. She pressed play instead. The story was first posted to Reddit's r/ghosts in 2016, shared by a user who has since made her account private, but whose post was widely archived and covered by paranormal news sites. Including Ghost Theory and Unilad Tech. She described herself as a skeptic, or a former skeptic, and said she downloaded the sleep tracking app on October 1st to monitor her sleep quality after a doctor mentioned she might be grinding her teeth at night. The app was simple. It recorded audio during the night, flagged unusual sounds, movement, talking, grinding, and compiled them into a report each morning. She used it for 3 months. Each morning, she'd glance at the report, see no unusual sounds detected, or light movement at 2:15 a.m., and move on with her day. She didn't listen to the actual recordings. No one does. The summaries were enough, until December the 30th, when she was clearing space and decided to audit the files. Most were silent. Some had her own breathing, which she found uncomfortable to hear. The intimacy of it, the vulnerability of sleep. She deleted them quickly. She almost deleted October 1st without listening to it. What she heard in order. First, her own breathing, normal. The soft inhale and exhale of deep sleep. Then a clicking sound, faint at first, then louder. A rhythmic clicking, not mechanical, more like deliberate, like someone making a sound with their mouth or their fingers, getting slowly closer to the microphone. Then her own voice, groggy, half asleep, asking, "What are you doing?" Then silence. 4 seconds of silence. Then a voice she did not recognize. A male voice, low and slow, with a cadence that was wrong in a way she couldn't immediately name. It said, "Nothing." The clicking resumed, much louder. So loud it distorted the recording. And then the voice again. Slower this time. Each word separated from the next by a pause that felt like the voice was being very careful about what it said. "I am dead." She listened to the recording 11 times. She and her son, who was 7 years old and sleeping in the next room, were alone in the apartment. They had been alone since October 1st. The front door was locked. The windows were locked. Her son's voice, she knew by heart. This was not her son's voice. And she herself, she had no memory of the conversation, no memory of waking up, no memory of speaking to anyone. She called her mother. She called her sister. She sent them the audio file. Their responses were the same. "Move out." She reinforced the locks first, changed them, installed a camera facing the front door, another facing the hallway. She started listening to the app recordings every morning. The clicking came back, twice more. No voice those times, just clicking. Loud, rhythmic, getting louder, then stopping. On the 4th Monday of January, she moved out. Her new apartment was quieter. No clicking, no unknown voices. She continued using the sleep app for 2 more months. Nothing unusual. The reports came back clean. When she finally stopped using the app, she wrote in her Reddit post, "It wasn't because she was afraid of what it would capture. It was because she didn't want to need it anymore. She didn't have an explanation. She still doesn't." She listed the 3 possibilities that made sense to her, in order of how much she wanted each to be true. 1. The app glitched, and the voice was some kind of algorithmic artifact, corrupted audio, combined signals, error. She wants this to be true, but can't explain how it produced a coherent 3-word sentence in response to a question. 2. There was someone in her apartment. She wants this to be the least true, but it would explain the clicking, the voice, the response to her question. It would mean someone was inside her home, listening to her breathe, and chose, for some reason she cannot fathom, to say they were dead. 3. Something else. She doesn't name what the something else is. She doesn't have vocabulary for it. She just writes, "something else." And it knew I was there. 3 stories. A family's luggage that arrived on a plane before they did. A road that repeated itself for 4 minutes while the clock counted the same 4 minutes twice. A recording of a voice that couldn't have been in that room, saying it was dead. What I keep coming back to is this. None of these people went looking for a paranormal experience. They were doing ordinary things. Flying home, driving a familiar route, sleeping in their apartment. The ordinary interrupted them, which means, if any of these accounts are real, and I'll let you decide that, it's not about the unusual places, or the unusual times, or the unusual people. It's about the ordinary moments, the moments when you're least prepared. What would you do if your luggage told a different story than your flight did? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you've experienced something that sounds like this, a loop, a gap, an impossible recording, I want to hear it. Subscribe and send it to the channel. I read everything. The next story is already being investigated,